Long time no see. Anybody that was listening to episode 85, which we just dropped a bit ago today, will know exactly what I'm talking about. In that last episode, we explored what I believe to be the most dangerous sentence in the world. That's just who I am. In these back-to-back episodes, we're going to complete what I'm calling the Freedom Series by exploring what may be the most powerful question in the world. What if I'm wrong? One sentence keeps us trapped, and one question sets us free. Before we jump in, though, I just want to say a great big thank you. Every week we receive messages from listeners around the world. Some of you have been listening since the very beginning, and others have just recently discovered the show. No matter how you found your way here, thank you for spending part of your day with me. It still amazes me, though, that one conversation can travel across continents, cultures, and experiences, reminding us that although our lives may look different, the questions we wrestle with are often remarkably similar. Today's question isn't about insecurity. It's not about doubting yourself. And it's certainly not about becoming indecisive. It's about something much more courageous: humility, curiosity, or growth. Or shall I say, and growth? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some of the biggest breakthroughs in our lives don't happen when we find the right answer. They happen when we're finally willing to ask a better question. What if I'm wrong? Think about that. How many arguments could end? Or how many relationships could heal? How many opportunities might appear? And how much wisdom could we gain if we simply became willing to ask those 4 words? The older I get, the less impressed I am by people who always have an answer. And the more impressed I become by people who never stop learning. Because learning requires something that certainty cannot provide. Room. Room for new information. Room for new perspectives. And room to grow. Today isn't about proving ourselves wrong. It's about giving ourselves permission to discover something we didn't even know yesterday. Because freedom isn't just about becoming someone new. Freedom is also allowing your thinking to become new. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. One of the greatest paradoxes of life is that certainty feels safe. It feels comforting. It feels confident. But certainty has a hidden danger. It quietly closes the door to learning. Think about it. If I already know everything, why would I listen? If I'm already right, why would I ask questions? If my opinion is settled forever, why would I ever grow? The problem isn't having convictions. Convictions matter. And so do values and principles. The problem begins when certainty becomes more important than the truth. That's when conversations become competitions. People stop listening to understand. They begin listening to respond. We've all done it. Heck, I think I did it about three weeks ago or so, and I caught myself. And I thought, just listen. Just practice what you preach. And what it comes down to is, once again, we begin to listen to respond. Someone starts talking, and before they've finished, we've already written our rebuttal. Not because we're curious, but because we wanted to win. But here's the question worth asking. When did being right become more important than getting closer to what's true? Those aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the strongest thing we can say isn't, I know. Sometimes it's, I hadn't thought about it that way. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The people I admire most aren't the ones who never change their minds. They're the ones who are secure enough to change them when new information deserves a new conclusion. That's real confidence. Not pretending to know everything, but never being afraid to learn something. Because here's what I've discovered. The mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. And maybe the first step toward freedom is loosening our grip on certainty. Speaking of certainty, we're now going to talk about something sensitive to most humans on something we all have: ego. Let's be honest. Most of us don't enjoy being wrong. I certainly don't. And there's something uncomfortable about realizing we've misunderstood a situation, or believed something inaccurate, or judged someone unfairly. Why? Because our ego quietly whispers, if you're wrong, you lose. But what if that's not true? What if being wrong isn't losing? What if it's learning? Imagine walking into a room where every person believes they already know everything. How much learning would happen? Very little. Now, imagine another room. People ask thoughtful questions. They challenge ideas respectfully. They admit when they don't know something. And they welcome different perspectives. Which room would you rather be in? Exactly. Growth has never required perfection. It has always required humility, though. One of the healthiest habits we can develop is separating our identity from our opinions. Because changing my opinion doesn't mean I've lost myself. It means I've gained understanding. Think about the people who have had the greatest influence on history: scientists, inventors, leaders, writers, thinkers. None of them grew by protecting every belief they ever held. They grew because they were willing to revise their thinking when reality taught them something new. Maybe that's why curiosity is so powerful. It reminds us that truth isn't threatened by questions. Truth welcomes them. And perhaps one of the greatest acts of personal freedom is giving yourself permission to outgrow yesterday's conclusions. Now let's talk about how curiosity changes everything. Children ask hundreds of questions. Adults often stop asking them. Somewhere along the way, many of us began believing that having answers is more impressive than asking questions. I think we've got that all backwards. Questions are where discovery begins. Questions build relationships. Questions solve problems. And questions create innovation. And questions have a remarkable way of replacing assumptions with understanding. Let me say that again. Questions have a remarkable way of replacing assumptions with understanding. Think about how often conflict begins with an assumption. They ignored me. They're upset. They don't respect me. Maybe. Or maybe we're simply missing information. Curiosity has a beautiful way of slowing down our conclusions. Instead of saying, I don't know why they did that, curiosity asks, I wonder if there's more to the story. That single shift changes everything, because curiosity creates space. Space for sympathy, space for empathy, space for grace, or space for a better decision. Remember what we discovered in episode 85. Freedom begins the moment we stop confusing who we've been with who we're capable of becoming. Today, I'd like to add something to that. Sometimes freedom also begins the moment we stop confusing what we believe today with everything that's possible to learn tomorrow. Because the most powerful question in the world isn't powerful because it creates doubt. It's powerful because it creates possibility. And possibility has changed the world. There's a point where curiosity stops being an interesting idea and starts becoming a way of living. That point begins with a simple decision. The decision to replace certainty with humility. Because here's something I've noticed. The people who grow the most aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room. They are the most teachable. They've discovered something incredibly freeing. Being wrong isn't to diminish their value. It expands their understanding. Think about the greatest lessons you've ever learned. How many of them came after you discovered you had misunderstood something? Maybe you judged someone too quickly. Maybe you assumed you knew the answer. Or maybe life humbled you. At the time, it probably didn't feel all that great. But looking back, would you erase those moments? I wouldn't. Because those moments didn't make you smaller. They made you wiser. And that's why I believe the most powerful question in the world isn't just, what if I'm wrong? It's really asking something much deeper. What else might be true? That question opens up doors. It invites conversation. It replaces defensiveness with discovery. And suddenly, you're no longer trying to protect your opinions. You're pursuing understanding. Remember what we discovered in episode 85? The sentence, "That's just the way I am"? It keeps us trapped. Today's question does the opposite. It unlocks the door. Because freedom isn't pretending you've never been wrong. Freedom is realizing you don't have to stay where you were yesterday. Every time you're willing to reconsider, you grow. Every time you're willing to listen, you grow. Every time you exchange certainty for curiosity, you grow. Maybe that's why growth has never belonged to people who always had the answers. It has always belonged to those who never stopped asking questions, or better ones at that. And once you begin living that way, our relationships begin changing right along with us. Now here's your first challenge. This week, the next time you disagree with someone, resist the urge to immediately defend your position. Instead, ask one more sincere question. Help me understand how you came to that conclusion. You don't have to agree. Just become curious. You may be surprised how quickly curiosity changes the entire conversation. Before we jump into the second half of today's conversation, if you're enjoying the show, I'd love for you to take a second to follow, subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode with somebody who comes to mind. Every share helps these ideas reach someone who's looking to grow or to think differently, or simply needs a little encouragement for today. Thank you for being a part of this community. One of the signs of maturity isn't that you've never changed your mind. It's that you're willing to change your mind when new information deserves a new conclusion. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes because I think it's really profound. Not because I said it, but because I believe it's true. I believe that with all of my heart. Somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that consistency means never changing. And I don't think that's true. Integrity isn't refusing to grow. Integrity is remaining committed to the truth, even when the truth asks something new of us. That's difficult, and it requires courage, because changing our minds can feel like admitting defeat. But what if it's actually evidence of wisdom? Think about your life. You probably don't believe everything you believed when you were 15 or 25 or 5 years old or even 5 years ago. And thank goodness, that's called growth. The goal of life isn't to become someone who never changes. It's to become someone who changes for the right reasons, not because of pressure, not because of popularity, but because you've learned, because you've listened, because you matured. The strongest people I know, they're not stubborn. Now, that's not to say I've never been stubborn myself, and that's how I've continued to grow, because I've definitely been stubborn. But those people are grounded. They have values. They have humanity. They understand something that changes everything. The goal isn't to prove ourselves right. The goal is to get closer to what's true. And I honestly believe that sentence has the power to transform marriages, friendships, leadership, families, even the way we see ourselves. Because once the truth becomes the goal, our ego finally gets to rest. And that might be one of the most freeing experiences of all. Let's finish by talking about the kind of freedom that lasts long after today's episode ends. Let's bring this conversation home by talking about what all of this really means. If episode 85 was about breaking free from the prison of identity, then episode 86 is about protecting that freedom for the rest of our life. Because here's what I've come to believe. Freedom isn't something we achieve once. It's something we practice. Every day, we choose whether to become more curious or more certain, whether to become more teachable or more defensive, whether to protect our ego or pursue the truth. Life has a remarkable way of humbling us, every single one of us, sometimes through success, sometimes through failure, sometimes through people who we never expect to learn from. The question is never whether life will teach us. The question is whether we'll remain teachable. And that's why I hope you never lose your curiosity. Never become so certain that you stop listening. Or you never become so convinced that you stop growing. Because the moment we believe we've arrived, we stop moving. And that's not how remarkable lives are built. Remarkable lives are built by remarkable learners. People who continue asking better questions. People who remain humble enough to admit that they don't know everything. People who understand that wisdom isn't measured by how often we're right. It's measured by how willing we are to keep learning. Remember these two thoughts from the Freedom series. Freedom begins the moment we stop confusing who we've been with who we're capable of becoming. And the goal isn't to prove ourselves right. The goal is to get closer to what's true. If you carry those two ideas with you, I honestly believe they'll change the way you think. And when your thinking changes, your life usually follows. And here's your final challenge for today. Today, ask yourself one question you've never asked before. Maybe it's, what if I'm wrong? Or, what haven't I considered yet? Then spend the day looking, not for evidence that you're right, but for opportunities to learn something new. As we wrap up the Freedom series, episodes 85 and 86, I want to leave you with one final thought. I don't think freedom is found in always having the right answers. I think freedom is found in never becoming afraid of better ones. The world doesn't need more people who refuse to change their minds. It needs more people with the courage to examine them. Because curiosity isn't weakness. It's strength. Humility isn't surrender. It's confidence. And asking questions isn't the sign that you're lost. It's often the first sign that you're growing. If you listen to both episodes 85 and episode 86, I hope you've noticed something. These really weren't conversations about identity or opinions. They were conversations about freedom. The freedom to become. The freedom to learn. The freedom to let go of yesterday's limitations and tomorrow's certainty. If these two episodes helped you think differently, then they've accomplished exactly what I hoped they would. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for continuing to challenge yourself. And thank you for proving, week after week, that growth is always possible. For now, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming back. I'll see you next week.